Hi there. Today we are going to do a lesson in trigonometry. And before we do that, I want to show you this picture of this Dubai Eye, it's called. It is the world's largest Ferris wheel. And if you look here in the background, you can see the tall buildings, and it gives you some perspective on just how incredibly large that Ferris wheel is. That Ferris wheel will seat 1,400 passengers. And once you get on the Ferris wheel, it is a 48-minute ride until you've gone around it one time. So very exciting. The reason we're talking about the Ferris wheel is because if you were to graph the Ferris wheel height over time, it would be an example of a periodic function. And that is a function that repeats a pattern of y values at regular intervals. One complete pattern is a cycle, and the period is the name of the horizontal length. So let me just kind of show you how that would work. So if we're going to make a graph, and if this is time, and this is the height of the Ferris wheel, for example. So when you start out at the beginning of time, you are at ground level. And then what happens is your height increases until it reaches the maximum, and then it starts to come down, and it's going to be hitting those same values, those same heights again, and then you come down to the ground, and then you go back up and up to the maximum and back down to the ground, and it just continues repeating. So it is called a periodic function. So it's repeating the y values. The heights get repeated. So the y value here is the same as the y value here. The y value here and here are the same, and here and here. So it keeps coming back to those same y values. So one complete pattern, so from the minimum to the next minimum to ground level, that is called a cycle, which is also called a period, the period of the function. Okay, so that's one complete cycle, and it can be measured from any point from where the pattern starts. So it could go from here to here. From here to here would be a cycle, okay, from high point to high point, or from this point over to right here. So the length is the same, the cycle length is the same, the period length is the same, no matter where your start and stop points are. Okay, so analyze the periodic function below. Identify the cycle in two different ways. What is the period of the function? So you begin at any point on the graph, and you trace until you hit one complete cycle. So this would be a maximum. It goes down to the minimum and then back up to the maximum, and it starts over again. So if this is the graph, let's see, 0 is right here. This is your origin. This is 2, and it goes to 6. So from 2 to 6, the period length is 4 units. Now, you could also start from right here. When you're at 0, you go up, go down to the minimum, and back to 0, and then you start over. And so that is 8 and 12. And so from there to there, it is also 4 units. So the period is the same. Analyze each periodic function. Identify the cycle in two different ways. What is the period of the function? Okay, so you could start at a maximum. So this is -3, and go down to the minimum, back to the maximum, and then you could start over again. So from -3 to 1, that would be 1, 2, 3, 4 units. Or let's say you start at 0, and go up to the maximum, back to 0, down to the minimum, back to 0, and start the cycle over again. So from 0 to 4, again, that's 4 units. All right, so identify the cycle in two different ways. So again, we go from a max to a max. So that would be -3 to 0, so that would be 3 units. Or you could go from a minimum to a minimum. So from -1 goes to 2, so that would be 3 units. Okay, next, is the function periodic? So you're going to do problems like this in your homework. If you see the cycle repeating, now in this case, it's just continually decreasing. So that is not periodic. It's not a repeating cycle. This one does appear to be a repeating cycle. It's going down and back up again. So we would say yes. And if it is, what is the period? So from the beginning until it goes through one cycle, it's 10 units. All right, is the function periodic? This would be a no. It's not repeating. This one appears to be a yes. It is repeating. And to go from the max to the max, from -2 to 2 would be 4 units. All right, next we have what's called the amplitude. And what that is, it's the measure of variation. And it is how far it varies from the midline. So we have a max. In this case, what are we doing here? We're counting by ones. So here's your origin. So this is 3 is the max. The min is at -1. So the midline is between there. So to find the midline, we basically are finding the average. So 3 plus a -1, and then divided by 2. So when I say average, I mean the mean, which is 2 over 2, and that would equal 1. So this is at 1, which sure enough, that's where the midline is. And then the amplitude, the formula for that, it's 1/2 of the maximum minus the minimum. Okay, so basically we're going from 3 to -1. That's 4 units, and half of 4 is 2. So what we're saying is from the midline, this is 2 units, and this is 2 units. So if we want to use the numbers, 1/2, the maximum height is 3, minus the minimum, so minus a 1, minus a -1. That would be 1/2 times 3 plus 1, so 1/2 of 4, and that would be 2. So the amplitude is 2, which we figured that out. With one that's smaller like that, we can just count. All right, what is the amplitude of the periodic function at the right? What is the equation of the midline? So the equation of the midline, that's going to be the average. So the low value here is 2. In this graph, we're counting by 2s. You have to watch that with this assignment. So between 2 and 4, if we find the average or the mean, so you add those together, divide by 2, you get 3. So, oops, I did that wrong. Let me go back here because I wrote the wrong number down. I thought that is not right. So 4 plus, this is a -2. That's what I did wrong. So 4 plus a -2 divided by 2. So we want to find the average or the mean of 4 and -2. So that would be 2 over 2, which is 1. There we go. Now we're in business. That is the midline. That's the middle. And so the amplitude is 1/2 of the max minus the min. 4 minus a -2. So that's 1/2 of 4 plus 2 is 6. It would be 3 units. So the amplitude is 3 units. And the equation of the midline, that is the horizontal line. So that is a y equals 1. All right, next one says, sound is produced by periodic changes in air pressure called sound waves. The yellow graph is in the digital wave display at the right, shows the graph of a pure tone from a tuning fork. What are the period and the amplitude of the sound wave? Okay, so let's do the period first. The period is the horizontal distance for one full cycle. So you can just pick anywhere here and see where is a full cycle. So this is a max, going down to a minimum, up to a max. And that goes from 0.004 to 0.008. So the distance between there, we would subtract, and it would be 0.004. So it's 4 thousandths the unit. Okay, and the amplitude, okay, remember the amplitude is how far it is from the midline. So basically it's 1/2 the max minus the min. So 1/2, and the maximum, let's see, we're counting by a half here. So up a half, 1. So the max is 2.5. The minimum is 1.5. So that would be 1 times a half, you get 1/2. So that's your amplitude. Okay, next one. A person's pulse rate is the number of times his or her heartbeats in a minute. So your pulse is the number of heartbeats in a minute. Each cycle in the graph represents one heartbeat. What is the pulse rate? So each cycle represents one heartbeat. So from here to here is a cycle. And so that is one heartbeat. What is the pulse rate? Okay, so will you compute the period or the amplitude of both? Well, if we're looking at heartbeats, we want to know how many there are in a minute, how long it takes is what we're looking at. We are going to be looking at the period because we're looking at the horizontal length of a cycle. Does the graph provide information you do not need? Well, we don't need to know the vertical information necessarily. So it says how many heartbeats in a minute? Well, let's figure this out. So one heartbeat is this length of time here, and it says that one horizontal unit represents 2/10 of a second. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 units represents 2/10 of a second. So we have to multiply that. That would be 1 second. So in other words, you have one heartbeat in 1 second. And it says we are looking for the number of beats in a minute. Well, there are 60 seconds in a minute. So if you have a heartbeat every second, that would be 60 heartbeats per minute. So that is your answer. There would be 60 heartbeats per minute. All right, one more problem here. An EKG, an electrocardiogram, measures the electrical activity of a person's heart in millivolts over time. Refer to the graph in the previous exercise. What is the period of the EKG shown above? So again, this is a period, and each of these units represents 2/10 of a second. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 units times 2/10, which would be 1.0, so that would be 1 second. That's the period. What is the amplitude? Well, remember, the amplitude is the max minus the min divided by 2. So basically, we want to know how many units this is. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's 6 units. And each of those represents a millivolt. So it's 6 times 0.5, which is 3. So this is 3 millivolts. And we want to take half of that because the amplitude is half of it, all right? So you divide it by 2 and you get 1.5 millivolts. All right, these are some problems from your homework. And the first one says determine whether the function is or is not periodic. If it is, find the period. Let's do this one. This one is periodic, okay? We have a nice curve here that seems to be repeating the pattern. And so we would say yes for this one. And it's counting by 2s, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. And so the period is 12 units. Going back, this one was a no because that's not repeating. The next group says find the amplitude and the midline. So in this one, we're going from here to here. And so the amplitude, remember, is 1/2 the maximum minus the minimum. And your maximum is 4. That's the highest it gets. The minimum is -4. So minus a -4, that would be 8. So 1/2 times 8 is 4. And the midline is the average of the mean of the max and the min. So that would be 4 plus a -4 divided by 2. And that would be 0. And sure enough, you can kind of tell that one by looking. The middle is at 0. So it's a y equals 0. It's a horizontal line. and the amplitude is the distance away, so it's 4 units away from the midline. So those are the problems that you're going to be doing in your homework today. Thanks for watching this video. Let me know if you have questions.